Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Ian Manuel to discuss My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption, published by our friends at Pantheon Books. Ian Manuel lives in New York City. He is a motivational speaker at schools and social organizations nationwide. At 14, Ian was sentenced to life without parole. My Time Will Come is a tribute to the capacity of the human will to transcend adversity through determination and art. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by Brittany K Barnett. Brittany is an award-winning attorney, author, and entrepreneur. As a daughter of a formerly incarcerated mother, Brittany knows firsthand the devastation caused by mass incarceration is far-reaching, and she's devoted her life to helping transform the criminal justice system. She's won freedom for numerous people, serving fundamental death sentences for federal drug offenses, including 7 clients who received executive clemency from President Barack Obama. Brittany is also the author of A Knock at Midnight, a story of hope, justice, and freedom. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. So please do so as you listen. You can post your questions and we'll get to those right after the conversation. I'll remind you, you can order your copy of My Time Will Come from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. And we appreciate each and every order and the generous donations that are coming from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Brittany.
Hi. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Brittany. Nice to see you.
You too. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Well, I have gotten through your book. My Time Will Come. I love the cover, by the way.
Thank
Blue
you.
and yellow. And I'm just looking forward to this conversation tonight. So
Me too. I'm glad by coincidence you can make it and I can make it.
yeah. So we're definitely going to have some fun, educate our audience, and have a serious conversation as well, because it is a critical issue. Right. That is the topic of your book. I want to start out on the part of the book that resonated the most with me, aside from incarceration, and that is Grandma Linda.
Ooh.
I am from the South. I'm from rural East Texas, and my grandma, Lena, there is just something about grandmothers in general, and for me, biasly, there's just something about Black grandmas from the South.
Yes.
And so I just want to touch on Grandma Linda. I want to open up by discussing your relationship with her and what that relationship meant to you and the foundation that it formed for you.
Because of Grandma Linda, it's the type of love that I feel like I've been chasing ever since her demise. Because for one human being to just love you unconditionally the way my grandmother loved me, it just makes you feel special. I mean, there were things that I didn't get a chance to talk to about in the book, or that were edited out. Things like Grandma Linda walking downtown to the Greyhound bus station, which was connected to Burger King, and she'd go and get 3 miniature cheeseburgers and be waiting for me when I got off the bus, coming home from school. And I back then I didn't think nothing of it. I just thought this was how things were supposed to be. But as I got older, I began to realize that no other grandmothers was really right there doing that for their kids, right? Or that she just really took a liking to me, man, and loved me unconditionally. Just Grandma Linda is the epitome of unconditional love.
I love that. I dedicate my book to my grandma Lena, and I talk about she's the purest love I've ever known. And I felt that. I felt that in reading, even just at the beginning of the book, I was captivated by her. And I agree with you. I think some of the things we don't realize at the time, the foundation that they're pouring into us, even at a young age. Yes. And so I just want to begin our conversation and set the tone with that. Like, even though you were young, right. You were 11 years old when she moved back to Georgia. What is like one of the most persistent values you feel that she instilled in you that you still carry today?
I would have to say just her strength and perseverance. People ask me all the time, how did I have the strength to withstand what I withstood? And the first thought is God, by the grace of God. That's the first thing that comes to mind. But when I think about it, my grandmother Linda picked cotton when she was young. And then when she moved to Tampa, she couldn't read and write. Only thing she knew how to do was cook. And she worked 26 years in the hot kitchen of Morrison's cafeteria in Tampa Bay Mall. And I just think that's exactly the amount of years that I did in prison, 26.
Wow. And
so those 26 years she worked in that slaving in that kitchen, kind of was probably where I got my strength from, and the cotton fields,
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it led to, just as I was reading further in the book, like I remember you talking about Grandma Linda cashing her checks, and when they would ask her to sign her name on the back and she didn't know how to spell her name, her last name, and she would mark it with 2 X's. And what that said to me was just how our grandmothers did so much with what seemed like so little. And that really resonated with me, and we'll touch on further of what you did with your own life, and it's just a blessing, to me. So I wanted to start our conversation with Grandma Linda. And, I just believe our ancestors are with us all the time. And so her presence is definitely felt. I want to get more into what led to you receiving a fundamental death sentence at the age of 14 for something that occurred when you were 13. Before we get to that, though, another thing that stuck out to me in the book was you have always been a person who excelled in school with reading and writing. Did you find in the classroom, did you find solace in reading and writing? Did you have teachers who poured into you to help you enhance the abilities that you had? Really what I'm trying to get at is, what role or failure did you see from the education system for you as a young child who grew up in extreme poverty, who endured trauma that, no child in America should have to endure? What role do you feel the education system played in helping you or failing you?
Yeah, that's a great question. One I've never been asked before. I think the education system, I have a two-pronged answer. Because it's not really cool to be smart in the hood, right? So even though I was seen as smart for my age or whatever, I used to try to downplay my intellect because it was not cool to be intellectual growing up in the hood. But the second part of that was sometimes in school, it felt good, like, to be better than the average Joe in certain subjects. Now, when it came to numbers, I was horrible. But when it came to reading and writing, just the ability to separate myself made me feel that's one thing that even though me and my mother had a complicated relationship, she would always tell me how brilliant I was. And I found that very fulfilling because my mother was someone I would always try to please because I felt like with some of the things she said to me as a child was that I was always chasing for, trying to chase for her acceptance, her love. She didn't like, she used to always constantly downgrade the color of my skin, and that's that self-hate that she may have had with herself. And it was reflecting out on me. But not to get away from your question, the education system both helped and hurt me.
With that, you're entering the criminal legal system for a crime that did hurt someone.
Right.
And you were 13 years old. I want to just, briefly talk about what led to you standing in the courtroom at 14 to even be facing a life without parole sentence.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a day I'll never forget. It was July 27th, 1990. I grew up in a place called Central Park Village. The Central Park was a little different than the environment of Central Park or New York that you guys might be familiar with. Only time we run was when we were running from the police. So we wasn't jogging around the park just for a good time. But on this particular day, to expedite the story a little bit, is I was sitting on the porch with a girlfriend of mine at 12 and 13, and I kept trying to get her to go upstairs with me, but she wouldn't. And a friend came by and asked me that I wanted to go to the game room. I said no. Another friend came by and asked me that I want to go do something else. I said no. By this time, hours had elapsed, and I'm growing frustrated with my then girlfriend, Lydia. And by this time, my third friend, Marquise, came and he approached me. He said, "Ian, I got a gun. Let's go jacking." And out of frustration, man, I said, "Yeah, might as well. There's nothing going on here." And I think about that day so much because had I went with the first friend, this would have never happened. Had I went with the second friend, this would have never happened. The third friend is when things went wrong. We met up with 3 older teens, went downtown. They kept trying to encourage me to rob this person, to rob that person. They gave me the gun, and I just wouldn't do it because it was too open. Finally, we all sat down on a curve, and they said, "If you're scared, Ian, Jim, which is my nickname, get a gun to somebody else." So I gave the gun to Marquise. Marquise passed the gun to his cousin, and Keith, and then the oldest teen ended up with the gun, and they passed the gun back down the line, and we made a pact. The next people that we approach, no matter if it's the right time, if it's too open or what, it's going down. Walk to this next couple sitting on the car in the same parking lot that we were sitting on the curb on. The older guy asked for change. I thought I heard the guy said they had change. I pulled out the gun. The lady screamed. I panicked and fired. Changed all of our lives that night. The song Self-Destruction starts playing in my mind. I panic and I turn and I run back to the projects in Central Park. No one knows that I've done this, but a police officer pulls up in the neighborhood. I still have the same clothes on. He calls me to the car. He says, "You fit the description of a guy that just committed a robbery downtown." No, that just shot somebody downtown. I said, "Man, all these people out here with red and black on, you gonna pick me out of a crowd?" He's like, "You're right about that. Sorry." But little did he know he had the right man. So that's how the crime happened. 3 days later, I was arrested in a stolen car and got to the detention center parking lot with a heavy heart. The officer asked me if I had anything else that I wanted to say. And I said, "Yeah, you know that lady that got shot downtown? I'm the guy that did it." And that's how my life. I'll never forget in the motion to mitigate sentence that in the motion to suppress my confession, the officer said that he immediately read me my Miranda rights. That didn't happen. What he did was go in the detention center, call the detective, and tell him that I had just confessed to a shooting. And he got back in the car and he was driving me downtown. I'm like, man, I haven't ate, I haven't slept. Just put me in the detention center and let the detective come talk to me here. He said, you hungry? I'll feed you. And he stopped by Popeyes. I hate chicken to this day. Got me something to eat. And all what he was doing, you know, that's Supreme Court case law that says what he was doing, that's considered coercing a child. He was giving me food to finish my confession. And but the motion to suppress was denied. And that's when my lawyer hobbled over to me with his torn ACL, and he said, Ian, I want you to plead guilty. I want you to throw yourself at the mercy of the court. If you go to the trial, you're going to make the judge mad. He's going to give you life. However, I've worked it out with him that if you plead guilty, you'll get 15 years. Now, I don't know about you or anybody in the audience, but even telling a 14-year-old kid, I was still 13 at that time because this happened in February. Telling a 13-year-old kid that he's going to get 15 years, that sounds like a life sentence. Absolutely. You know?
Absolutely.
So I turned him down, and he hobbled back over to my mother. My mother came to the side of the jury box because that's where they kept the juveniles at, in the jury box. And she said, baby, listen to your lawyer. Plead guilty for me. And I did. I thought about all the times that my mom had told me to do something and I did the opposite, and I ended up reaping the consequences of that behavior. And so that's how I ended up sentenced, subjecting myself to be sentenced to life because I didn't get 15 years.
Wow. The work that I do is representing people who are serving life without parole sentences for federal drug crimes under these outdated federal drug laws. And I was a corporate lawyer, working on these cases pro bono. And what was so mind-blowing to me, Ian, is how flippantly we throw around 15 years, 20 years, like it's $15 or $20.
Yes.
And I felt the life sentence my clients were serving. I felt it with every fiber of my being. And I think because of how flippant people are being with these years, we talk about life sentences like it's nothing. And I talk to people and I tell them my mother went to prison. And it's devastating for any loved one to be incarcerated. But for me, it was a primal wound when it's your mama. And my mother served 2.5 years in Texas prison. And that felt like forever to me. That was a long time. The 2.5 years was a long time. And so as I work through the cases of life without parole, and you realize, you think through of life without parole is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. And my clients, and here you are a teenager, 13, 14, and you're facing the same amount of time in prison as the Unabomber. And I think through it, and it's really what I try to get through to people. Life without parole is forever. So here you are, we fast forward, you've been convicted, and you are sentenced at the age of 14 for a crime committed at the age of 13. You're a child. You are sentenced to spend the rest of your natural life behind bars. Now, I know I have adult clients who receive life, and they talk about how they felt numb, how they had no understanding, how their mind couldn't really grasp the severity of the sentence. And these are adults. And so I'm just wondering if you could talk to us at 14, how do you process life without parole, or are you even able to process it?
So I definitely wasn't able to process that I had life without parole. I remember immediately afterwards going to the holding cell that they take you to after sentencing, and my cousin was in there, and he asked me what did they do. I thought each life sentence represented 20 years. So I said, man, they gave me 40 years. You know, that's how out of touch with it that I was. I definitely couldn't. And even later on, I don't even think my mom comprehended it, because I was ended up being sentenced to 3 years mandatory because of the gun. And I remember after 3 years was up, my mom was like, why aren't you home yet? When you coming home? I'm like, Mom, I did 3 years mandatory, but I still have those life sentences hanging over my head. And I still didn't even know what life meant, even when I was saying it. I knew it meant a long time. I still didn't comprehend it meant forever until I was dead.
And that just resonates so deeply with me, because it's forever. There's no way around it. And to be looked at as a human being, a child at 14, to have our laws through this judge literally say you are unworthy to breathe air as a free person ever again. I still have a lot of trouble comprehending it. And I am an attorney, who works in this space. And so I definitely think through that through a lens of, here you are as a teenager, not even able to fully comprehend and grasp the severity of this life sentence. And then you're put into prison with adults, and you're placed in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement in this country is beyond cruel and unusual. But here you find yourself placed in solitary confinement for 18 consecutive years. Now, I just talked about how long 2.5 years was for me. And I wasn't in prison. My mama was. And so I think about 18 consecutive years in solitary confinement. I have a question that's two-pronged, and I want to remind the audience to please ask any question that you may have. We will have Q&A at the end. Please utilize the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. But I have a question for you. It's going to be two-pronged. I'm going to ask the first part first. Why? Why were you in solitary confinement for 18 consecutive years?
So the way the system is set up, I want you to imagine an elevator, an out of control elevator. First of all, they put you in the elevator on the first floor, and the elevator only has 3 floors that you can go to. Floor 1 is the most restrictive. Floor 2 is a little less restrictive, and floor 3 is the least restrictive that you can get when you come out and watch TV, go to the rec yard a little more often, order 10 food items instead of 5 food items, But while you're in this elevator, you have to have 6 perfect months on the first floor with no write-ups. And you can get a write-up for everything from receiving I got a write-up one time when I was 16. My mom sent me a card, and it had a little frog on a frog on it. I put it in the window. The officer walked by, stopped at my cell, wrote something down, and kept walking. I jumped up, because one thing about solitary, it heightens your senses. You can hear better. You can see better. Your instincts are just so sensitive because you're sensory deprived, right? And so I looked, and I see he had a clipboard in his hand. A few days later, I received a disciplinary report that says I was making rounds in Quad 3, and I stopped by inmate Manuel's cell door, and I seen he had a card in his window. I ordered him to take the card down. He refused. inmate Manuel was in violation of such and such rule for obstructing his window, right? That's an additional 6 months in solitary confinement. And those 6 months turn into years, and those years turn into decades. Now, say you make it all the way to the third floor. 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. You make it all the way to the third floor. And then an officer lies on you and says, you threatened me. You can go all the way back down to the first floor to start over again.
Wow.
So that's, and when you got first of all, an adolescent that's maturing, going through puberty and in solitary, the officers would yell at me, I'd yell back. Before I went to solitary, I was walking in the grass instead of the sidewalk. I was in unauthorized areas, places I wasn't supposed to be. And they ended up placing me in long-term solitary and keeping me there for 18 consecutive years.
Wow.
From November 1992, when George H.W. Bush was on his way out, to November 2010, when the guy behind you, on your shoulder, Barack Obama, was on his second year.
Wow. So I asked how, and I just have so many thoughts running through my head, but I'm gonna stay focused. My second part of that question, I asked the why. My second part of the question is how. How did you survive that? Like I see you facing a reality that would be unbearable for many people. I see the policies of this elevator, the prison policies being criminal in and of themselves.
Yes.
And I think about looking at you now, it's just something about your energy that feels so amazing and full of light.
Thank you.
The survivorship that I see, that I feel from you, how did you survive 18 consecutive years in solitary confinement?
Wow, the how has many answers. One, the grace of God. Number two, the strength and resilience of my grandmother reside in me. Number three, my imagination. I dive within the depths of my imagination to survive. I constantly would fantasize when you're powerless, when you are stripped of all your everything but your wits, you have a tendency to dive within the depths of yourself, man, to find that reason to live. So when you're powerless, you dream of power. I would constantly fantasize about being in a position of power to change the way the corrupt system was working. To the people that had abandoned me and left me for dead. Those 26 years, I only got 3 visits from any type of family or friends. Besides my lawyer, now my lawyer in the media would come see me,
Mm-hmm.
But, just when I got out of solitary confinement, I would stay at I would stare rather at the visiting park on Sundays and Saturdays, and I'd be like, nobody don't want to come see me now, but someday somebody's gonna pay to see me, So it's just those type of thoughts that kept me going. And my poetry, I mean, someone sent me Tupac Shakur's book, The Rose That Grew from Concrete.
Yes.
And so I started rewriting Tupac's poems and sharing them with my fellow prisoners. And those guys are the toughest critics in the world. Like, they're tougher than Simon Cowell, the Sandman on Apollo. If you don't got it, you're totally vulnerable. You're exposing yourself to ridicule if you don't have what it takes, because they're gonna let you know it. Like your homeboy Drake say, you either got it or you don't. The theory is brilliant. You know what I'm saying? So when I would share my poetry, I get so much overwhelming feedback from the audience that it gave me the resilience to believe that I have something of value to offer the world, and that if I ever had the opportunity, I could succeed out here, because in prison, men have been hurt, they've been abandoned, they've been broken, they've been lack of love given to them. And if you could reach their heart, if you could touch their soul, then this out here, man, is a piece of cake, So it was those 4 things, including especially my poetry.
Through the poetry, because that just resident. It touched my soul in a way that was different.
Right.
You know, I am in touch with a lot of people that are incarcerated, buried alive. And I even saw you mention being buried alive in one of the poems that you wrote. But I think reading it is one thing. And I would love for our audience to be able to hear you recite one of those poems. And the poem that stands out to me is the title of your book. And I hope everyone who's watching has got the book or will purchase the book. It's a great read. But you have a poem with the same name.
Yes. Yes, I would love to share that poem with you. It says, I promise you, the brunt of my oppression has a purpose. And this same person that you persecute will one day be worshiped. Though I stand before you bare-chested and shirtless, with my soul and emotions naked, just wanting to be nurtured. Yeah, despite the desperation, desertion, and hurting, my time gonna come. Though I compose this poem, not knowing if I'll ever be able to perform it in an auditorium, I do it with the faith of a poet that believes he was born to do it, like an acorn caught up in a storm, flung from the branch where it was born. You can only hold me back for so long. My time gonna come. Despite the difficulties and disappointments, my determination remains undaunted. Though the waters of my tomorrows are deep and uncharted, the buoyance of my character will float unwavering towards him, like a song written, yet unrecorded. My time gonna come. Though you wrapped me in chains and sprayed me with chemical flames and did all of the things you did to add to my pain, my circumstances will change. I believe this with the depths of my being, that as long as this world continues to spin, it cannot end until it's been enjoyed by end. Remember this day, because things won't always be this way. My time gonna come. My time gonna come against all conceivable odds. My time gonna come.
Wow.
That's like an old spiritual, isn't it?
Oh my God, I got chills. I'm telling you. Wow, that's gonna preach.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is amazing. It's beautiful. Wow, Ian. That's powerful.
It comes from a place, it comes from a deep place. You might think sometimes men do something to hurt you, but God meant it for good. You know, I went in that cell and I discovered that God gives each and every one of us a gift. Mm-hmm. And it is my belief that my gift is to compose words in ways that move people. That's one of them anyway. And I'm just so thankful for it.
It's incredible. It's so powerful. And you talk about feeling power, being powerless physically, but you're dreaming of power. And it made me think through something my dad told me when I was facing a difficult decision, actually to resign from corporate law, to follow my passion to transform this criminal legal system. And I was going back and forth, Ian, because I had worked so hard to get there and the financial security, and I was giving it up and to what I didn't know. And I remember my dad telling me, BK, because that's what he calls me. He said, stop worrying about the challenges and imagine the possibilities instead. And what I hear from your poem is you were just imagining the possibilities, the power of that, and the manifestation of that. Yes. Right now, to have you here with us tonight, talking about your book, and oh my goodness, it feels like that old Southern gospel of the church with the wooden floor shaking underfoot. Like I just could shout. It takes me through this power of the imagination, and and just the power of that we hold within ourselves, and in ways that at times that we're being led in ways we may not even realize the meaning of it at the time. And what that brings me to is the woman you shot. You developed a relationship with her while you were incarcerated.
Yes.
Tell us how that came about.
Well, it came about because I did something that no attorney would ever recommend their client do, and that's reach out to the victim of their crime. And how that happened, again, God, sometimes people do things that mean it for good, mean it for bad, but God mean it for good. My lawyers at the time, a guy by the name of Brian Gonzalez, sent me all my legal work, and he told me he was done with my case. There was nothing more he could do after the motion to mitigate sentence was denied. He told me that was my appeal. I didn't know that they had a whole appellate process still to go. He filed a motion to suppress mitigate sentence with the circuit court the trial court that I got sentenced in, and told me that was it, right? And he sent me all the paperwork, but in that paperwork was my victim Debbie's phone number and address. And so I just got, and this is something I've learned in my 44 years of existence. Each of us, each human being, we receive these tugs at our heart to do something. And whether that's leave corporate law and become a criminal justice lawyer, or for me, it's come up in, when I was a little boy, go downtown and look for a job, and I got a job at the YMCA. Pick up that phone and call the lady you shot and tell her that you're sorry. I followed that. Most people push those emotions down. It's human instinct to push those emotions. Man, that's a crazy idea. Why would I give up the comfortability of being a corporate lawyer to go chase criminal law when it's where am I going to stay? How am I going to pay my bills? Right? Ian, calling this lady, the lady could call the prison and say you harassing her. They're going to put you in confinement and they're going to take your phone privileges for you. But I didn't think of that. I thought about the possibilities. Yeah. And I had a childlike imagination because I was still young. Mm-hmm. So I went out, I made the phone call. I remember it like it was yesterday. Back then you could just press 0 because you had a live operator. And she put the call through, and the lady on the other end answered and said, "Can you ask him his last name?" And I told her lady my last name, and she accepted. And I just remember saying, "I called to wish you a Merry Christmas," because it was Christmas '91, and to apologize for shooting you in the face. And then she asked me a question that no 14-year-old should ever have to have answered. She said, "Ian, why did you shoot me?" And I just remember saying it all happened so fast. And it was a mistake. It just happened so fast, Debbie. And then so we talked a little more, and I asked her, could I call back? She said, yes, I called back. And I don't remember much about that second conversation except asking her, could I write her? And she said, yes. And that's how our correspondence started.
Wow. That is such a lesson in the power of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And it's such a lesson, again, in the power of your resilience and your survivorship and your determination and your imagination and imagining the possibilities. That it's just so incredible to me. And it speaks volumes of her character.
Yeah.
Because it tells me she saw Ian.
Facts. She saw me as a person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really beautiful to me. And just a reminder, please ask us any questions in the Ask a Question feature. But I got to get to a subject that is near and dear to my heart, because I believe that as lawyers, that we have an obligation to help right the wrongs in the criminal legal system. I feel that there aren't many professions where you can literally save someone's life. And in the position that I am and many of my colleagues are in as lawyers, it is a privilege and an honor for us to do this work, to represent people who were set to never breathe air as free people again. And you're sitting here because of this man that I have his book that's probably torn all up because I've read it so much. I remember being a second-year law student and going to see Brian Stevenson speak at SMU Dabney School of Law in 2009. And I just have been enamored since then, you know, to hear him talk about how you have to believe in your clients, in your case, and you have to believe with even when you can't see, you know, the power of belief. And I wanted to talk about, from your perspective as the client, Brian's client in this situation, what that meant to you for a lawyer to show up and show out.
Woo! You put that so well. That's exactly what he did. He showed up and he showed out, man, when the world had left me for dead. All of a sudden I get this letter in the mail, and I didn't know who Brian Stevenson was at the time. I didn't know anybody in Alabama, but to get this letter, and the letter basically said that I'm here to save your life. Basically, I'm here to save your life. And you know, I run a nonprofit law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. We primarily only handle death penalty cases for the last 20 years. However, in a recent decision in Roper versus Simmons, the Supreme Court ruled in a way that gives me the belief that they might be ready to overturn life sentences for juveniles. I'm just paraphrasing here. Mm-hmm. And he said if I would be interested, you know, to get in contact with him, he gave me a self-addressed stamp envelope and his phone number. And I convinced the lieutenant to let me out of solitary confinement to go in the nurse's station to make a phone call. And I got him, and he promised me he would send 2 lawyers down to look over my case. They sent 2 lawyers down, and they looked into my case, and I was exactly what they was looking for. And they were exactly what I was looking for. It was a match made in heaven, you know. And but it was an uphill battle because, you know, people think you get a lawyer or the victim says she forgives you, then they just wave a magic wand and you're out. Oh no, it doesn't work like that. So he appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and 2 cases made it to the U.S. Supreme Court: Graham versus the state of Florida and Sullivan versus Florida. Brian represented the Sullivan case. What had happened was I was pending too. It just, those cases got denied before mine, while the Second District Court of Appeal was still taking a longer look at mine in Florida. The First District Court of Appeal in Florida denied Graham and Sullivan and had them go to the Supreme Court. Long story short, they ruled in Graham a win for any one of them was a win for me. They held the proceedings. They held the proceedings until the ruling in the Graham case and the Sullivan case. Once they ruled that life sentences was illegal and cool and unusual punishment of the 8th Amendment to put that in to sentence a juvenile to life without parole. I remember hearing it on NPR like it was yesterday. And in a 5-4 decision, the U.S. Supreme Court overturns and I screamed, it's over. It's over. But I didn't know that the state of Florida did not want me to ever be released. I went back to be resentenced under Graham. When I get back in the courtroom, the state drops a bombshell. Your Honor, we are appealing. Appealing what? How can you appeal Graham? This came from the U.S. Supreme Court. Your Honor, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that this was for non-homicide offenses. Mr. Manuel is charged with attempted murder, which falls under the homicide statute. Wow. So we don't believe that Graham applies to Mr. Manuel. Look at you chopping at the bits. Any lawyer would be chopping at the bits at that. Yeah. Like, what?
It's outrageous.
That's exactly right. And so the state attorney appealed to the Florida Supreme Court, who did not accept their appeal. So they appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied certiorari. Said, get that out of here. What are you talking about? And so I went back for resentencing in 2011, thinking I was going home, that I finally had beat all the odds. And then the judge said something before he went in his chambers to deliberate that let me know I was not going home that day. He said, there was a statement made today about rehabilitation. But when Mr. Manuel's crime occurred, I like to remind everybody that the legislative intent in 1990 was to punish, not rehabilitate. You can kind of, when you've been in the system a while, you can kind of put your finger on the pulse in the courtroom to know if it's going to be a good or a bad day or a good or a bad outcome. The judge came back out after that statement and said, Mr. Manuel, I nullify your life sentences. In place of the life sentences, I re-sentence you to 65 years and followed by 10 years of probation and 2 years community control. I couldn't believe it. I was crushed. I think that's the most crushed I've ever been. I don't even remember being that crushed when I received the original life sentence. You know, I think I felt it more then, you know?
Yeah.
And went back to prison. Thank God my lawyers didn't give up on me, and they kept appealing. And 5 years later, they appealed. They found a case, a perfect case came out that applied to me in Peters versus State. And it basically just said that if a juvenile couldn't be sentenced to no more than 40 years in the state of Florida if his crime happened, if his first degree felony happened between 1983 and 1994, and my crime happened in 90, it just fit perfectly. And I was sentenced to time served.
Wow. I want to ask one last question, and I'll go to the Q&A. First, I just want to give a major shout out to Brian Stevenson, the Equal Justice Initiative. He just serves as a great inspiration for me in the work that I do. And that's just powerful. Last thing I want to ask before we go to Q&A is, it never gets old for me to have a call with my client to tell him or her that they will not be dying in prison. Tell us how you got the news of freedom and the feelings from that day?
So that's my last day of incarceration. It was November 10th, 2016. I actually gave my lawyers them something to smile about because 2 days prior, you know what had happened 2 days prior, right?
Mm-hmm.
She say, So I gave them something to be excited about. And I was in the county jail. You know, I went back to the county jail. They placed me in confinement because at the time in my jail, if you have over 20 years, if your sentence is over 20 years, you have to stay in confinement for the duration.
Wow.
And I remember going to court, and the vibe of the courtroom was totally different, right? And the judge asked me, did I have any last words? And I read him this statement that I'm going to read to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I stand before you today, Your Honor, against all judicial odds. It is rare and improbable for someone with my particular set of circumstances to be standing before you again, to be resentenced for the fourth time for a sentence determined to be illegal and unconstitutional. Initially, I was a child sentenced to die in prison, an adolescent full of aspirations, cast into this vast ocean filled with adult sharks and predators, and told to swim, survive, find my way back to shore the best way I could. Well, here I am, but I'm not unscathed by my journey. My heart bears the pain of my punishment. Look around this courtroom. It's different. The faces have changed from the original cast members. The judge, the state, the defense, my mom, dad, brother, etc. Everybody except Debbie and me. Two people with one common interest, waiting on the justice system to catch up to my remorse and her forgiveness.
Mm.
Hopefully today is the day we can stand together as an example in a country deeply divided by so many racial dimensions and show that justice does prevail, that wrongs will be made right. And as English Lit teaches us all sentences have a period that brings them to an end. Man, he couldn't do nothing but let me go after that, man.
Yeah, he just gotta let you go immediately. That is so powerful, because it was also you, as you've been doing over the entire course of your incarceration. You're standing there, you're saying, I am Ian, see me.
See me.
See me, and now free me.
And now free me. Yeah, see me.
Free, and here we are. And I could go on and on, but let's go to the Q&A.
Okay.
I'll share the questions. So Mary Beth Williams has a great question. She says, was there a person who served as a source of strength for you or a mentor?
Well, for strength, I did look at Nelson Mandela as someone, I'm like, this one human being had been incarcerated for 27 years and 18 years in solitary confinement. So I knew he was my source of saying, this is what a human can withstand. And I was right there up against it, man, 26 and 18.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's something that 27, I had a client who was released in October, and he served 27 years, and Mandela was his source of inspiration too. It's so powerful to hear you say that. That's a great question, Mary Beth. Thanks for asking that. We have another question. This is a great question too, and I'd love to hear it from your perspective, Ian. What can people like us who are watching do to help change things?
There's so many things you can do. You could vote, right? You could vote for people that have criminal justice reform or prison reform as an agenda in their campaign. You could help support a prisoner. Something as simple as writing a prisoner. Mail call is the most important part of a prisoner's day. Hearing his name called for mail. Download the JPay app and support a prisoner that way. Donate to these organizations that are out here on the front lines doing the work. Brittany has an organization. You might want to say what it is, Brittany.
It's a Buried Alive project.
The Buried Alive project. The Equal Justice Initiative. Help support organizations that's out here on the front lines doing the work, man, every single day to try to change the system.
I completely agree with you. You know, I think we live in an information age these days, and being able to educate ourselves, even by attending this event tonight, goes such a long way. And I love to get your insight on it, because I truly believe that people directly impacted by the injustice system in this case, should be leading the way and at the center of any movement, of any work surrounding them. And so thank you for sharing your insight on that. Another question, this is a great question as well, because it taps on you and Debbie's relationship. Do you think restorative justice is a step towards a more just and humane system?
Definitely, man. But what people don't kind of understand from my situation is it takes both sides, and I had to reach out first. And what me and Debbie have is abnormal. Usually it's just abnormal for the assailant to reach out to the victim and for the victim to be so open and receptive to it. You know, one of the things that used to frustrate me when I was in Florida State Prison, and they used to do executions. And after the executions, invariably, all the time, I turn the radio on the NPR and I hear someone say, this is what my uncle, this is what my brother, my mother, this is what my dad would have wanted. Justice, him being killed in the electric chair tonight, is justice was served. Had Debbie died, I would have had to hear that from her family. Mm-hmm. But she survived, and we all got to see what she wanted. She got in the New York Times and said, had Ian been a blue-eyed, blonde-haired white boy, this would have never happened to him.
Wow.
And that was shocking to hear her say that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with the restorative justice. I think that what we have to remember as we work towards transformation, we hear criminal justice reform and we hear it's all over. It's fashionable. It's popular right now. you know, and I believe there's power in words as well. And I am not a reformist. We have to completely transform the system. When you reform something, you're just tinkering with a broken system. You know, we have to completely transform the system, completely reimagine what justice looks like in this country. And to do that, we have to be able to look at freedom as multidimensional. It doesn't, we need the laws to change. We need the Supreme Court to rule. We need Congress and state legislators to change the laws. But systemic change doesn't always have to come from Capitol Hill, Supreme Court, or state legislators. Systemic change comes through this restorative justice as we're talking about. Systemic change comes from Ian, you sitting here tonight with your book. Like, you are creating systemic change with every step you take every day in freedom. Freedom. And that's what I want people to be able to understand, that freedom is so multidimensional. One question that's coming through, and I think it's important, and it's not so strictly related to the case or anything like that. It's more related to the book itself. And the reason I think it's important is because it is so important, I believe, for us to tell our stories.
Yes.
And especially for Black people, people of color, to tell our own stories, because history shows how tragic that can be when we leave that task to other people. And the question that's coming through, I think, could inspire it and hopefully give someone who's watching inspiration and motivation to write their own book. They want to know about the book writing process, and how long did it take you to write this book? How did you go about deciding to write this book?
Well, I started writing this book in solitary confinement. I wrote all the way up to from age 0 to age 15 when I was going to solitary confinement. And I found that getting past that point was difficult because it was so painful to relive a lot of that process. But after I got out, I got with a team of people that helped me through therapy and things like that, which is needed after you go through the horrifying experiences that I experienced. But then I got with a team at Penguin Random House, and man, they helped get the story out of me and onto the page, which is what I'm so appreciative of.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful story. Again, I'm just going to encourage anyone who's watching tonight to be sure you get this book if you do not already have it. My Time Will Come. Buy gifts for your friends, encourage other people to read it, because it is one thing to hear of witnesses telling the stories like myself, but it's another thing to hear directly from you, Ian. And I just really hope people get the book, encourage others to read the book. And I know our time is winding down, but I just want to thank you for this beautiful time that we just had. It has just been food for my soul, medicinal for me. And so thank you. Thank you.
This has been such a amazing conversation. I've had everything from goosebumps to tears. Like, seriously, you brought me to tears talking about when Debbie and you first connected. And it's beautiful to think that you still have so much hope and strength of spirit. And I think, Brittany, your moderating was amazing.
Amazing.
You asked him everything. Oh my God, it was just amazing. And we got to hear your poetry. Yeah. I hope you're still writing a lot of it. I don't know. Do you write a lot of poetry?
I feel like I lost it. My girlfriend tells me to stop saying that, but I used it as a survival tool for so long, and I don't need it that much. I don't need it anymore. So it's to the side. But every now and then, what I do is, when I'm posting something on Instagram, a rhyme will come to me, and then I'll put it in the caption.
Well, you're an inspiration.
Thank you.
And I am just so happy that you shared your story with us at Books and Books in our little virtual bookstore. I hope maybe you'll come to Miami in November and come to the Miami Book Fair, because we are planning to have it in person and virtual, but hopefully both of you maybe will join us, and we can maybe do a reprise of this conversation, because it has been amazing, truly.
Thank you.
And I'm
Thank
just
you.
so grateful to both of you
I'm grateful, and I'm
for
grateful
being
for
with
you
us.
having me.
And just remember, everybody who's watching, if you haven't already gotten your copy, get it. Don't wait. We'll ship it right out to you. And thank you so much. Seriously, it's been really beautiful and
It
moving.
has been.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, good night,
Thank you, Brittany.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.